make sure to let the organizers at World Virtual Tours know that some of these links have not reached you guys, because obviously we need them to be able to function. But I will also put in there for you guys, in case that it happens again or you don't receive the document, here in the link that I've put there, which is the one for the Academy specifically for this course, you should have everything. It's kind of like a dedicated website for it. So if at any other point links don't work or you don't receive the emails or whatever, just go back to that website in any case. So, but I'm glad that you guys have let me know, because I honestly didn't know any more than that. I don't copy the website from that perspective. I only send information that I need to send. So I'm very sorry. Some things have gotten a bit sort of lost in translation. So I'm apologies for that. Okay, and let me see how we're doing for time. And hi everybody, welcome, welcome, welcome. Sorry, I'm just making sure I haven't missed anything on the chat. Thanks so much for letting me know. And no, Mark, don't worry, there isn't a quiz, but there may be there is a general feeling of questions. I did have some questions, and in fact I will post the questions here as well, so you guys can have them at hand. They're purely for pondering. There is really no right or wrong answer, which is really what this is all about. So I'm gonna post the questions here just for people to have a general thought, like I said, but like, you know, no worries at all. This is not a test. This is not, you know, the case. However, if any of you wants to receive the certificate at the end of the full 4-week course, there is a small questionnaire. I promise the questions are very, very easy, and you will be able to sort those out. But anyway, I think it's time that we get started. So hello everybody. Hi, how are you all doing? Thank you so much for joining. I am so happy to have you all here, and we're gonna get started. And I have some good news and some bad news. The bad news I've only just found out, but do not worry, we're gonna sort all of this out. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Lilian Céspedes González. I'm sure many of you know me here in World Virtual Tours, and I am very happy to be celebrating a whole year of tours and lectures with you guys. How crazy is that? I can't believe it's October 2023 already. So thank you so much for having been supporting me so long and along the way. And today we're doing something very new. Today is my very first talk and class on the Free Academy on World Virtual Tours, and we're gonna be dealing with my specific subject of expertise, the one thing that that I actually did my PhD on, which is the Norsemen, the Vikings. And for that purpose, today we're gonna be focusing on a very specific subject, but more on that in just 1 second. Thank you so much, guys. It's lovely to have you here celebrating with me. So for those of you who don't know me, I am both a historian and a tour guide. Like I said, my PhD is on the Middle Ages, in the Viking Age specifically, from the University of Winchester. And what we're doing today is just part of everything we do here, all of our projects here in World Virtual Tours. You have the links now in the actual chat for the way you can keep on supporting us, because everything that we do is thanks to you and the wonderful support you give us over time. The links in there take you to my personal site where you can see all of my different talks and tours, and also to the way you can donate through PayPal and Stripe. Thank you so much, guys. It's very, very kind. And now, without any further ado, we're gonna get started with the session. Now, we're doing things a little bit different today, guys. So we are actually gonna have the chat open for the majority of this talk. I know, massive, right? But the way we're gonna do it is the following. I am gonna post one more time in here the link to Havamal, because I've been made aware not everybody received or had a link for the source directly. So I am gonna block the chat temporarily for now. So chat is not open as of right now, but the link is now in there. This is the link for the text that everything we're gonna be doing about today is gonna be based on. This is the source of Havamal. What I want to do for the very beginning of the session is just share a few PowerPoint slides to give you a little bit of context. And then with the questions that I was mentioning and, obviously my guidance and whatnot, I would like to hear from you guys what your thoughts are about Havamal. So the link is there for the actual source. We are focusing in the first 70 stanzas, which are the short poems. I'll explain all of this in a moment. And these are some of the general questions to think about. You don't need to do a very thorough reading or anything like that. I'm not expecting you all to, come up with all of these transcendental ideas, but just to give you, a few sparks of direction. For the time being, what we're gonna do is start with the actual PowerPoint for a little bit of context and for a little bit of further understanding together. And then when we're done with the PowerPoint, I will open up again the chat, and then we can get the discussion, because the entire point of this is to really be it's a class. You're supposed to participate and to give your points of view. So let's get started with the PowerPoint first, and then we will go back to our commentary. Okay, so we're starting this from the beginning. So this is it. So today we're starting the understanding of the Vikings through their sources. This is class 1, and this is just a general overview of how things are gonna go. So today we're gonna be looking at Havamal specifically. Next week, we're going to be looking at the Saga of the Volsungs, which is also online. And then on week 3, we will be looking at the Saga of the Greenlanders, which is also online. Like I said, the link is in the chat somewhere, but all of the links are also here. So if you just go to the Academy, free Academy courses, you will find all the courses in there. And if you go to the specific website there, Understanding the Vikings Through Their Texts, if you didn't receive links or if you need to watch the replay of this, which I believe will be available for a short period of time, for a week, so you can catch up on it or whatever, all of those details will be in there. The last lesson would be kind of a contextual lesson, so we can pull from all the sources together and understand what these ideas are telling us about Norse culture and the underworld. The structure of these topics is supposed to be like an interactive reading group. In case you're not familiar, let me explain. A reading group is people coming together that will have not necessarily read in depth, but at least, had a look at the sources, get some ideas from them, and then bounce off each other to try and, pull some narratives together. I am obviously here to provide you the context, but it is often, at least from my experience, that we learn best when we are interacting with each other rather than just hear me blah, 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 blah all the time. So that's the general dynamic of how this course is going to go throughout. I understand that today's things may be a little bit more difficult if not all of you got access to the links in time, so don't worry, I was prepared for this just in case. And of course, if at any point after any of the classes you have further questions or you need extra help, just email me and I'll be able to answer everything for you guys. Excellent. Well, let's get started properly with a bit of context about Havamal and where it comes from. So Havamal is one poem, specifically speaking, that we find in one single source, which is the Codex Regius, the sort of sepia picture that you see here in the background. This is a copy of that codex. Now, this codex was written somewhere around 1270, so we're actually talking of a source that is not written originally, or at least the piece that we have, in the Norse period. What happens with all of these, or a lot of the sources that we have about the Norse, is that they are sources that are very old, normally from the 8th to the 10th century, but the original copies haven't reached our times. So they've been recopied or retranslated at some other point in the Middle Ages, and the document that had made it to us is that one. All right, I hope that makes some sense. Well, the Codex Regius is our only existing evidence of what we call the collection of poems that now, in edited volumes, comply the Poetic Edda, which is one of the oldest and most important sources of knowledge about the Norse and Viking culture. I'm using Viking like this because, as you guys probably know by now, I don't like using the word Viking outside of the specific context. But well, we will get into that as the you know weeks go on. Now, in this collection of poems, there is actually several. The Poetic Edda is a book of about 300 pages, so it's quite abundant. But one of them, and perhaps the most famous and the most important one, is Havamal, which is the link that you have right there on the chat and in the actual group. And in case that you've just arrived, because I'm aware that the chat sometimes hides these things, I will be posting that again at some point later on. But that's Havamal. Havamal is one of these Eddic poems. And what is Eddic poetry or Eddic poems? Well, it's what we call one specific type of Norse poetry. The Norse give us some writings in skaldic poetry, which is incredibly hard to actually wrap your brain around, and then in Eddic poetry. And Eddic poetry is very similar to what in English we call a meter of songs. They are 6 lines. They tend to be quite short and sweet, very much to the point. Now, as you're going to see in an example that I believe I have on the next slide, let me do that. There we go. This is an example of Eddic poetry. So you will often see that in English we may need more words, and that's because, well, Old Norse is actually quite a sort of compact language, or a bit more compact than English. It's because it uses, well, the declensions that it uses are a bit more, I guess, effective in the way that we build sentences, at least from the point of view of language economy. So often the Norse text is shorter than what we need in English to express the same idea. And well, that's how we get these translations. This is an example from Havamal itself, from stanza 27. So if you're using the link that I sent, you will find this. Something to consider, by the way, because some of you may have used another version of Havamal, is that the translations can vary, but anyway, it says more or less the same. So it goes like this: Os notur maður meth aldir kemr, which is what you see here, a witless man, blah, 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 that bat at han pegi, engi pat veit at han eki kan, nem han melitil makter, weet dat maður hin vekti veit, thought han melitil markt, which is everything that you see here translated in English. So all of this has its own sonority, its own composition. I'm sure you, even without knowing Old Norse, you will identify some sounds and some, ways in which the verse works. This is more or less the structure of most Eddic poems. We are not gonna translate Eddic poetry live, guys. Don't worry. I'm not gonna be throwing Old Norse at you, and that's the reason why the texts that we're using are in English. But whenever we are looking at sources like this, you need to keep in mind that translations always, always, always sometimes have some problem. Why is that? Well, because as much as somebody may be an expert in a dead language such as Old Norse, just because you're an expert, it doesn't mean that you use it exactly like the people did back in the day. And sometimes, particularly in what concerns Norse and the sources that we're going to be seeing this week, and of course in the following weeks, a lot of these were translated during the 19th century. So often political, cultural, or even linguistic biases and agendas interfere in the way we translate some things. So, if something maybe sounds a little bit odd or whatever, just take it with a pinch of salt, because it's likely to be the translation itself. if I mean, the ones that we're using today are free and available on the internet for everybody to use, doesn't mean that they are the best translations. It just means that they are the most accessible to us. I will be giving some recommendations for specific translations if you want like a, a proper one in a book later on. But overall, this is what Eddic poetry is, and this is where we get Havamal from. Now, if you've been scrolling through the text or reading through it on your own, you may notice that it's a bit of a jumpy poem. It's not actually a full-on narrative. Every stanza, which is the number that you see in the poem, in the same way that it's 27, it could be, 36 or whatever, it's almost like a poem within the poem, if you see what I mean. The reason for this is because, like I said, the Poetic Edda and Havamal itself are collections of other poems that then are compiled together. So if it seems like it goes from one thing to another without necessarily a lot of cohesion, that's the reason why. It's the problem with these sources is that, well, once we are translating or meddling with their original format, it's hard for them to necessarily flow. But the entire point of this is not to read it as a long story, but just to go catching on the messages that the narrative, that the poems are giving us. Well, let's talk a little bit more specifically about Havamal as a poem before we start digging into it. So Havamal is also called the sayings of the High One, which I will explain in a moment what that means or where it comes from. And the poem itself is, technically speaking, divided in about 3 sections. The section that I recommended that we look at is the one that belongs in Gestapar. And this section mostly deals with potential advice. The second section, actually, there is actually a typo in there. It should be 111. So 82 to 111 tells us different love adventures by Odin, which may seem like a strange jump from general advice to love adventures, but as some of you may have encountered in your own, daily affairs, you can learn a lot from your love affairs. And in the case of mythology and Odin specifically, it's often through these encounters that we find a lot of interesting information about Norse mythology and Norse beliefs. And of course, through love, you can also learn good life lessons, whether for good or bad. And then we have the words of Lodfafnir, which are a preamble to talk about the runes, followed with more advice. Then we have this section 138 to 145, which is what we call Runatal. And Runatal originally, and technically speaking, should be separate from Havamal. Now, the transcribing person, the actual monk who was pulling this text from the 13th century upon which we have this copy now, seems to have merged them together because he thought they were related, even though in theory they should be 2 different texts. And in a way, they are related and they go together because they are indeed the sayings of the High One. And who is the High One? Who is the one that speaks through Havamal? It's Odin himself. And in fact, there is a stanza 79, in which Odin reveals himself as the speaker. There is a couple of hints here and there throughout the poem that could make you think, oh, is it Odin or a god or a potential, magical super being that is actually supposedly telling us this? In that stanza specifically, it gets revealed that it is Odin. And this is actually quite interesting because it's really one of the very few, if not the only source within Norse culture where we have such an attestation of this is me, Odin, talking and telling you this source of knowledge. And one of the very few places where we get information about how Odin acquires the knowledge of the runes, hence Runatal, and all of this advice that he himself acquires through the sacrifices and through the endurance that he has undergone to become wiser and supposedly more knowledgeable. I say supposedly more knowledgeable because, as some of you would have known through the Norse mythology and Viking world talks that I've given in the past, Odin also messes up quite a lot alongside with the rest of the Norse worlds. So, there is a definite sense of didactics in there, but not everything is just a direct lesson from that perspective, if that makes sense. Many people have argued that Gestapater, the first half of the poem, or the first third of the poem, is kind of like an ethical code of conduct, if you like, as to how you should behave. And it gives us very interesting insights into how Norse society developed, how they engage as communities, and what sort of things were expected from their day-to-day life. I'll give you a few examples in a couple of moments. Now, the other thing that we find from a linguistic perspective, in this case in Gestapar, is the fact that um, the poem was written at different moments in time and probably originally by different people. It's very obvious from a linguistic perspective and not something we can see in the English translation. But if we were looking at the Old Norse translation, we were all Norse specialists, that stanzas 76 and 77 follow a slightly different format or ideology than some of the others across the poem from a linguistic perspective. And those stanzas actually tell us that the oldest part of this poem, as it was originally conceived, is actually belonging from the 10th century. So, as you can see, we're talking of ideas that were developed over 1,000 years ago and that still marked an entire society. In fact, one of the questions that I've put in there for you guys to ponder is if you think some of the things you're reading in Havamal are relatable to us still in this day and age. Because, well, I think you'll find out some of the advice and some of the affairs and ordeals that Odin has to overcome himself could be quite relatable, even though we live in a very different world. And well, I would like to hear your thoughts about it. I will not rip into it just yet, but yeah, just something to remember. Because of this is what we call essentially gnomic poetry. Now, I've just thrown a huge word in there for you guys. What does that mean? So, gnomic poetry comes to say that these sayings were not just written for the sake of being written at random. They were essentially put into actual verse and into written form so that they would be easier to remember. And what that tells us is that, in the same way we all have sayings in our mother tongues or in English, or if you speak another language, and it's a way for you to, remember either a social conduct or good advice or things like that. And I'm sure we can all think of many examples. Perhaps the conception of Havamal was exactly that. And that's why it seems moralizing or maybe ethical to give people some kind of guidance. And because you would remember things better in verse or in song or something that, can be a bit more catchy, that would be a way to kind of pass on that information onto other generations. Remember that Norse society, it's all about oral tradition. That's also one of the reasons why we don't have a lot of sources left for us. It's all about me telling you something and that being remembered and being passed on in the society to form a general idea and to, bring cohesion to the general community. So this may be the way the Norsemen had to pass those life advices from one to another directly from Odin himself, from the High One. Kind of like, I guess, like the Bible, but in perhaps a more direct sense in some ways, because this is not necessarily giving us any ideas about mythology or world creation. This is quite literally about the way somebody should behave or should act in specific situations. So I am gonna give you some examples, and while I give you these examples, I'll also open up the discussion. So these are some questions that I would like us to navigate and to kind of think about together. So what do you think was really the point of Havamal? Why do you think they wrote this in this specific way? Why do we have some bits that are similarly advised, but some other stuff? What's the point? What kind of values does it promote? If you think it promotes any values. What about survival and moderation? What does it come across about those two specific subjects? What do you think this poem says specifically about honor? And finally, like I said, do you think Havamal is relatable and why? So what I'm gonna do right now is I am gonna open the chat so then I can open up the couple of examples and we can start, talking about the poem in more general terms. I appreciate as many of us on the talk, so let's try and be orderly. I appreciate that chat can be sometimes confusing. Do not worry, I'm gonna be on it and I'm gonna be muddling through it so we can all participate. And again, if you don't know what to say or you would rather just engage with everyone else's wisdom, that is fine. But the entire point of everything we're doing here is to, like I said, muddle through these ideas together so we can get to the core essence of what these people were actually trying to talk about. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just open up the chat. So chat should now be enabled. And I will now proceed to put the links in there again so that if somebody missed them before, they can have them at hand. So let me get that there. Okay, so these are the links to, well, everything in general. And if I can just get the actual, hang on a moment, I'm just gonna paste once again the link to the actual Havamal itself, which, as you can see, I am prepared for all of these things somewhere in the actual slide. Excellent. So I am posting now the site to Havamal. Let's go back to the poem itself and to these questions. So let me catch up with the chat very quickly and to some questions that you may have. No, Havamal was not a real person. It's literally, well, the person who is supposed to be telling us the poem is supposed to be Odin, but Havamal literally just means or translates as sayings of the Old One. Did we receive the right text? If you arrived a little bit later into the talk, you may have noticed or found out that we figured out not everybody had seen the actual text. So perhaps not. 27 says something else on the example. For the unwise man, it's from a different translation. I think when I did the slide, I decided to I did the slide before I send the final link. So that may be the reason why. But it's a matter of translation in that particular case, right? I think Susan, stanza 51 is similar to fish and guests stink after 3 days. Yes, exactly. So I'm glad that you've picked up on some of those ideas. Like you are, you are literally being told what are the norms to behave when you have, people coming over to your house. Why do you guys think that that is the case? Why is a text like Havamal telling you, something like that? Guests are okay, but for this amount of time, or this amount of time is too much, this amount of time is too little. What is it trying to tell us there? If people don't like, well, yeah, that's fair enough, 100%. Excellent. Let me get on to further. 27 for the unwise man. Yes, there we go. What do you mean on both languages, Renate? If you mean on the actual translation, the translation that is easily available for everyone is only in English, I'm afraid. The reason why I have the other one on the example is just because, well, I use Old Norse normally because from the direct source is the case. Otherwise, it would be very, very difficult on, for everybody to follow up. How do we know how Old Norse was pronounced? Right. So we know that Old Norse follows pretty much the same rules of pronunciation than modern day Icelandic. Old Norse delivers into Old Icelandic, and Old Icelandic and modern day Icelandic are pretty much the same. As a rule of thumb, in the vast majority of old Scandinavian languages, the strike of the voice is on the first letter or the first syllable always, and then down. So that's normally how it goes in that sense. And yes, in terms of rhythm, it is pretty much Epic poetry has its own rhythm. The 6 lines is supposed to get you rolling in a very specific way. It's more like spoken word. It's most supposed to sound like you talking normally, but with emphasis in specific words. And that is done by composition. So the words that the poet uses are specifically to create a tonality to the actual lines. It's honestly the linguistics behind it are quite convoluted and complicated overall. Epic poetry is one of the hardest poetries of dead languages out there to actually follow through. Skaldic poetry is 3 times worse. So it is a combination of the actual language itself and the way it sounds, the way people would normally communicate, and the way words are specifically put in places to create those natural inflections to roll things over that way. It can be viewed as a guideline of behavior moral. Yes, Dominic, 100%. And I genuinely think that is roughly what they were trying to do with Havamal. Someone else may have a different idea, I don't know, but I think that is overall what they wanted to actually do with this. Well, Donna, we are actually gonna I am teaching you about the Vikings, but through their poems. It's exactly learning about them through their poems themselves. I'm sorry if that was not what you're looking for, but that's the point of this study. Oh, excellent. Yes, and isn't it interesting that as Asrith is saying that it is quite literally Odin telling you this. Why do you guys think Odin will, present itself and tell you, hey, this is the way? Who can remember what Odin was god of, or many things of? Bandit Queen, it reminds me of Proverbs. Yes, exactly. And in fact, there is a beautiful quality to Havamal overall that overlaps a lot with Chinese proverbs. And there is a quality to these old cultures to create those lines of wisdom from elders and their experience 100%, which once again emphasizes the idea of community and listening to somebody who knows better than you. In fact, I'll give you the 2 examples that I had prepared for this in a couple of seconds. I just want to hear a few more since they were mostly verbal. Yes, exactly. Just again, keeping things in mind in the same way that all of the stories of the Norse come down by oral tradition to us in terms of mythology. It's the same thing. You might look at heroic tales to learn. Yes, exactly. And that's exactly why I ask, what does the poem say about honor? Honor in Norse society is literally the word of the day. That is the reason why, as Susan was referring earlier, you must keep your guests for a certain specific amount of time. There are specific ways of being proper and being honorable. Heroic societies, and the Norse society was a heroic society, follow these rules of conduct, which is all based on self-reputation and honor. For them, their honor, and it's something that we see, for example, with similarity in places like feudal Japan, the samurai and the lords over there, honor was everything. If you could trust somebody, it's because you knew that person was honorable. Being honorable also meant that that person was going to be looking out for the community. And remember, we are talking about people who lived in very hostile environments where depending on one another was often crucial for survival. If you cannot trust your neighbor, if your neighbor is not honorable, what will happen if your cows die this winter and you don't have anything to get by? Being proper, and I mean proper, not necessarily good, I don't know if good is the right word, but being proper was important so that other people would be able to, rely upon you. I might, yes, exactly, values within a social group. And those values must be shared by everybody for survival, right? If we all have a general idea of how we should be living life in this hostile environment, then we are most likely gonna be able to make it. Otherwise, things could get really, really hard. The poem says about honor is that he wants to make, yes, change is absolutely vital here. You must be open to the challenges that nature throws at you in that regards. So, that's very important, very, very important at all. And yes, great, excellent. Oh, I am, I am so glad to see you guys. So many of you, I can see. Tonya also said something very similar. We did have the unwise man zipping. Yes, well, there we go. This is how things roll. But I'm very, very glad to see that you guys can see how this is. Susan, like I was mentioning earlier, the links were sent and they were open up on the actual website, but apparently not everybody got them. This is something that I've been made aware of now, and it's something that will be passed on to the organizers. But well, it's something that I was not made aware of in any case. Sarah, I'm wondering if it's because Vikings had spread out. Yes, thank you, Sarah. 100%. This was something else to consider. These people went all over the world. We don't have just Norsemen in Scandinavia. The Norsemen go over to England, they go to Normandy, they're gonna go into Germany, Russia, Ukraine, they're gonna go all across a continent and arrive to, Vinland, which is essentially Newfoundland. How do we keep those values together? How do we keep our identity as people together if it's not, through these ideas? Exactly like that. Excellent. Oh, well, Lance, I'm glad that this is coming through. Well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually move us over this specific slide, where I have some poem highlights. For those of you who may have not been able to get out of the poem itself, let me just, oops, I think I've just accidentally get me out of the slide. Let me just get us there. For those of you who may have not been able to read the poems beforehand, I wanted to give some specific highlights so we can have some context together about these poems. So I've picked 4 in total that I think are quite interesting about what they're saying. So let's focus together on the first one. Less good than they say for the sons of, hang on, my slide is in the way. For the sons of men is the drinking oft of ale, oft meaning often, by the way. For the more they drink, the less they can think, and they keep watch o'er, which is over their wits. Now, considering the stereotypes, I'm sure a lot of people have about the Norsemen and Vikings, etc., etc. How does it feel to read such a commentary about ale and drinking overall in a society, particularly back in the day, where perhaps I think often we think their moral values were a little bit different from ours? I don't know if this was surprising for anybody. I don't know what that makes you feel about their values, why that kind of commentary will be in the text. How does that relate to our modern day society? How does this commentary about ale and drinking make you feel? Because this is just one of the many highlights. If you actually follow the text, you will find comments like this all throughout the texts. And there is always one word. I don't know if any of you have caught on this. There's always one word that is highlighted when we are talking about drink and in general about these life lessons, which is already in this text. If anyone has noticed it, I would love to hear. Similar to Bedouin culture, yeah, hospitality for mutual benefit, 100%. And if everybody follows the same rules, then everybody knows what to expect. Everybody knows how to behave, how to be, respected, etc., etc. Similar to Homer, yes, Tonya, 100%. The stories would be shared from time to time, and the cadence, exactly. In fact, we have many evidence that actually show that the Norsemen and the poets that wrote this were aware of Greek and Roman texts. So there is a further insight in there, I guess, about the knowledge and awareness that people like the Norsemen, which often get this bad reputation of being, savages, raiders, whatever, they obviously were cultured and literate to some extent, but in their own way. Michael reminds me of Beowulf. Thank you so much. I know at least a couple of people on this talk who will know this very well, because I ran a reading group this summer about Beowulf. Exactly that. And you know what, Michael? Because Beowulf is a heroic tale based on Havamal, and it is about the Norse themselves. So again, there is a lot of overlap between these people and the messages they're sending. It all runs in the same loop. And there is something beautiful about Norse culture. Things don't necessarily have extremes. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed a genuine sense for moderation and things kind of going on a cyclical nature? Just like Jormungundan itself, the sea serpent that is holding the world together, everything is always in continuum. In the same way that when Ragnarok destroys the earth, a new earth or the same earth will come back together. All of these ideas are tied together. And it's important. Kindness and generosity, yeah, Maria, 100%. And they are at the core value. Again, if we are not kind towards our neighbor, a bad winter may come or a nasty situation may come. We may find ourselves in a feud with our neighbor. And how will we ensure the survival of our community? It would be pretty hard for sure. That's a given. Odin sacrificed himself. Yeah, not sure if he's the father god or not. Well, 100%, that's the big question. No, is he really the one telling us all of these stories because he sacrificed himself, or what? It's one of those things. And yes, well, the one with biting the shield is because this is the Louis Chessman pieces. They are very, very famous. It's supposed to be part of, again, warrior culture that we usually associate extreme drinking with and whatnot. So I thought it made an interesting contrast with what the poem is actually saying. I guess it depends on what the poem thinks excess of alcohol. Exactly. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, Susan, because many people may not know this, but back in the day, particularly in the Middle Ages, water wasn't often safe to drink. The vast majority of drinks that the Norsemen would have had alongside with their contemporaries were alcoholic to a minimum degree, because the alcohol would kill the bacteria. The vast majority of the time, what they are drinking is ale, and it's not ale in the way we think of beer or ale nowadays. I guess what a standard ale currently is 4%, while in the Viking Age it would be much lower. It would perhaps have something like 1, if so, because everybody had to drink it. And if you were, if you were drinking ale that was 4%, I don't know how you were gonna be able to take care of the fields, if you know what I'm saying. It's gonna be quite difficult in a hostile environment. And when, yes, exactly, yep, supplies are important, and therefore being, yep, sharing survival 100%, Femka. That's exactly the point. I'm so glad you guys are literally getting into this. Excellent. Oh, I'm so glad. Keeping one's wit simple. Thank you, Dawn. Exactly. This is wit. Wit is the one thing you see throughout the entirety of the text, and even something that if you're reading other tales of the Norsemen, you will encounter quite frequently. Being wise, being sharp up here is the only thing that will get you through life. Now, what is Odin the god of? He's the god of wisdom, amongst many other things. So, of course, Havamal is going to be sayings that will fulfill you with wisdom. And keeping your wits about is the only way you can survive the winter, is the only way you can ensure those pesky guests don't take more advantage of your hospitality than they should, is the only way that going into a hostile environment you can protect yourself. Very important. What about 61? Fed and washed should one ride to court, though in garment none too new, thou shalt not shame thee for shoes or breeks, nor yet for a sorry steed. So what is this telling us? You should look good when you're going to court, but not your clothes should not be too new, just in case. Why is that? What could be the fear of your clothes looking too new? But your shoes should be looking good, and your steed shouldn't be, a sore sight for eyes. What does that mean? Oh my God, yes, that is Denise, that is exactly it. Very, 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 very well noted. Thank you so much for that. Right. People got drunk and misbehaved. Exactly. Obviously things would go wrong. I know you love Beowulf, Lily. Thank you so much for joining us here. The excess, exactly. What did they drink? Yeah, beer and ale. Normally when we're talking about the Middle Ages overall, and specifically the Viking period, ale and beer are exactly the same. The only difference is the grain that we get them from. Mead, Ellen. Mead is normally specifically for certain festivities, because Odin himself actually had to go and find the mead of wisdom, the mead of poetry. Mead is supposed to be a superb drink that makes you as wise and as good a poet as Odin, but you cannot just go drinking mead left, right, and center. I don't know if you guys know, you can do mead in your home, but it has a very high alcoholic content because of the fermentation process. So it would be not as abundantly made as necessarily as ale. You specifically need honey to make mead as well, which may not be as easily available in some places in Scandinavia. So mead is a specific drink for very specific circumstances. uh, Definitely for riding well to court. So there we go. Do the artifacts that we have, um well, communal drinking vessels, to some extent, perhaps. We see drinking horns and cups, a lot of cups. Often we have the idea everybody drank from a horn, but that's not necessarily the case. To the point of them being communal, difficult to say. We don't often find DNA, and we've never really found like huge, drinking vessels that would be unwieldy. But it's like it could happen in specific rituals. However, the ability to prove that is difficult. Right, I can see that there are a few thoughts in here. To make others feel inadequate, yes, 100%. To not show off. Silent observer sounds like you may wash your body, but if you put on smelly clothes, it's pointless. Also, an interesting point, in case you didn't know, guys, the Northmen, the Vikings, actually, by their own traditions, had a dedicated wash day. Every single Saturday, it was a wash day, and it was both a wash day for their body and their clothes. Obviously, you may run out of clean clothes. I'm sure it's happened to more than us. But yes, you need to be aware of how you appear. Remember, personal appearance, honor, all of it is related. And of course, you may not come off as being showing off or being too inadequate, because by doing that, you could make other people uncomfortable. More importantly, if you ride to court, if you are riding to court and you are not presiding court, then you may just be, somebody, not necessarily, the main event. So you should behave appropriately. Everybody and everything you do has a place in time. There is no need for you to feel good to belittle others, essentially. And there is no need for you to be presented in a good way that makes others look unworthy or lower. It was in Norse society, equality and trying to be fair was very important, again, because of honor. Of course, just because we have these things written here, it doesn't mean people weren't getting themselves drunk left, right, and center. And it doesn't mean some people didn't like to show off. But there would be consequences and there would be social judgment, and you need to be prepared for the social judgment, if you see what I mean. Yes, exactly. You don't want to show up into society entering. Yep, exactly. Great. Humility, very important. So again, do you guys notice how the topic of moderation is always constantly here? How could it be that these radical barbarians of the North were constantly reminded about moderation? Everything in moderation. Notice how the advice hasn't changed since Norse times to nowadays. Everything in moderation. Because in moderation, there is width and there is wisdom. And this is the way you can go through life. There is another part of Havamal in relation to this that comes to say that if you get too greedy in life, you may get nice riches, and that is good because obviously you'll be wealthy. But what happens if you get too wealthy? It may happen that somebody may want to come rob you, and as a result, they will stab you and they will kill you. And what good was that for anyone? What's the moral of the story? Don't get too cocky, essentially. That's, for the lack of better words, don't get too cocky is the moral of the story. Be cautious, do good, but be aware. Be aware, because not everybody is going to be gentle. Not everybody is going to be kind. Not everybody is going to see your new clothes as a sign to compliment you or to be aware of your, kindred spirit. Some people may use that against you. So you need to be aware. As you can see, this is very cynical, isn't it? It's a very cynical way of looking at life in the middle of the 10th century. What has changed? I often wonder. I don't think anything has changed. Right, I'm aware that we have 10 minutes left and I have a couple more things to show you. So let me get you to the other highlight of the poem. These stanzas 75 and 76 are my favorite because I think they really highlight what Norse society is all about. So I will carry on reading your comments while I give you a few minutes to see this. What is the difference between oat and wheat alcohols? Ryan, it often has to do with fermentation. Fermentation processes and how easily available they were. Wheat in Scandinavia wasn't always very, very available. We often find barley instead, in that sense. But yes, excellent. So I see you guys see this. Sumptuary laws forbade. Oh, excellent. There we go. Yes, forbade other than the nobles to wear certain clothes. Exactly. So you don't want to appear to be unabiding by the laws. The law in the Viking world was super important. That's the reason why these people had assemblies from a very, very early stage to be able to put things in common and to set things right. So as you can see, in some ways, Havamal is showing us what the law is reflecting from a different perspective. Well, I'm just gonna grab a tiny bit of water while I give you a couple of moments to think about this idea. Cleanliness is important indeed. If you appear to reach, yeah, I can see this going exactly the way it is. Excellent, great. 76, everyone will be judged. Yes, and everyone dies, but your good name will survive. Yeah, reputation. Yes, 75 seems pagan, 76 seems Christian. Thank you, Gabriel. I'm so glad you picked on that, because it's definitely something that we often have to be aware of. The fact that sometimes Christian interference happens in here. The thing is, and although there may be some Christian undertones in there, remember that in Norse society, the thought of the afterlife and be remembered after death is something that happens by your own kin, by your own descendants, by your own family, friends, etc., etc. This is the way in which people are remembered, by your name being preserved. That's the reason why in many other societies we have books of dead, right? We may not necessarily have burials, but we have the books of the dead. Say their names. When you say their names, they come back to life. If what you've done through life is good, if what you've done through life has been fair and your fame is worthy, people will remember you. You may not be here, but people will remember you. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters, because everything else will die. But if you do good and if you play fair, legacy, exactly, Susie, legacy is what will get you through. There is also a hell in Norse beliefs, right? 100% femka, yes. And normally speaking, it's quite a gloomy gloomy version of hell in that sense. It's not something that is very, very glorified. So it's important that you speak about the dead, because otherwise they will disappear. And that's exactly what this is saying. The prospect of an afterlife is great, but since you don't know where you will end in the afterlife, let there be another life after your death on this earth by your good, by your goodwill, by your good reputation, speaking up for yourself. Exactly. Never die in the honor of, yep, exactly. I've been on several cathedral. Yes, yes. This is something even in Christian society and in more modern times, the way people will remember you at the end of the day, if you think about it, is all we have. Because tomorrow I may be gone, and you guys may not remember if my eyes were green or if my t-shirt was blue or whatever, but you may remember, oh, hey, that was the crazy girl about the Vikings. And that's probably what you will remember and how my memory will live on. So it's the same that these people are suggesting. If you behave with wisdom, if you act appropriately, if you follow certain rules, and they are not oppressive rules, really, they're often common sense, then life will be easier for you and for your community, which is important. The community aspect is super important. You will survive, you will get through it, and because you will get through it, you will always be there. It's quite metaphysical in many ways. Like, I don't know how many of you were expecting to get this deep here today with me, but I did promise this was going to be quite intense, so here we are. The way you behave will be remembered. Yeah, exactly. This is how we all are marked entirely. Destinies, all exactly. The survival of the name. In Yes, that was the Egyptians indeed, and the book of names. Perfect. And again, in terms of the Christian element, I cannot emphasize enough that in the 13th century, of course, the transcriber is Christian. So are there undertones in there? Most likely. But to what extent, that's difficult for me or for any scholar to say, because we don't always find, those little things here and there. Right. I'm running out of time. So let's get to the bottom of a couple more things. What do you think? Well, exactly. What you think of you does not matter because it's what others think. Exactly like that. And again, that comes back to the idea of humility, moderation. If you don't cause an extreme reaction one way or another, then people are probably going to have good thoughts about you. It's not all going to be so abrasive. Excellent. Well, we are getting to the end of this. So let me remind you of a few things that are important for us to talk about in here, which are these translations. So the first one that I've put in here, which is the Penguin Edda, it's the one that is most easily available through Amazon, in most bookstores. If you are in the UK, you can find this in any Waterstones very easily. It costs, at least in the UK, less than £10. It's normally about 8 or 9. It's very affordable, very easy to read, and it's a pretty decent translation. However, the best translation of the Poetic Edda is by Dr. Caroline Larrington, who is a great expert in Old Norse. Another one that is good to have at hand is Ben Wagoner's Poetic Edda by Troth. The Troth, normally found online, not many physical stores have it. And I like that one because the introduction and the contextualization of the verses is very good. And finally, particularly, I thought this may resonate particularly, at least with some people in the audience. Jackson Crawford is one of my favorite peers. He is a wonderful Old Norse scholar. He has an entire YouTube channel dedicated to Old Norse and Havamal and everything else. So I would very much recommend you go there and find out. He has published something that we call the Wanderer's Havamal, which is a modern day translation of Havamal, but also he has the Cowboys Havamal. And that's kind of what I wanted to get in here with the idea of how does it apply or relate to our modern day society, because there are many places around the world where we still live in isolation, where we still live in ways that are not necessarily the typical, whether it's cowboys, whether it's something else, then that's a matter of opinion. But if you think about the way a lot of people in these traditional societies, whether it's cowboy ranches somewhere in America, or more traditional agricultural societies anywhere in the world, a lot of the things that we've been, learning about the Norsemen and that Havamal talks about are still relatable. So if you want something that will really hit home, then definitely Jackson Crawford in there is your man. That's a definite. So there we go. And I'm pretty much out of time now, guys. So this is all for today. I'm putting in there the links once again. You can find the rest of the talks that we're doing over there. You can also find all of the details in the way you can keep on supporting World Virtual Tours and myself through different ways. And remember, all of the sessions for these are every single, what day is it today? Saturday. Every single Saturday from now up until week 4 at the exact same time, over and over. Next week is the Saga of the Volsungs. Remember, if you do not find the links, I will go back to actually to that slide, guys. I will remind you where that is. So take a screenshot or a photo of this so you can remember. You can always email me in there to ask any questions. The one at the bottom, the specific free academy website about the Vikings, is where you will find the links if you do not receive them by email, for sure. So that's another way about finding this, which I think will be useful and a good thing to have in mind. In any case, like I said, this is all we have for today. It's been my absolute pleasure to have you here. If you have different versions of the poem, just let us know, and I will be asking World Virtual Tours to remember to send the copy of the links, just in case it went missing, or if it was somewhere that wasn't so obvious, so that you guys have it for the next time. Now, for the next session, we are, again, the Saga of the Volsungs is quite a big thing, so I'm not asking you to read it all. I'm asking you to, just read a bit. We're mostly gonna be focusing on the story of Sigurd, who is the greatest hero in Scandinavian literature, and Brunhilde. And specifically, there is a chapter in there about women, which is the conversation between Brunhilde and Gudrun, that I would really like you guys to focus about. It's all in the indications. And again, if in the meantime you have any questions about anything, please let us know over email, either directly to World Virtual Tours or to my email directly. And yes, if you want large print, I'm sure World Virtual Tours can arrange that as well. Again, I will put in there the links for all of the ways you can keep on supporting us through PayPal and Stripe. There is also the link in there for the tours that are upcoming, because outside of the Tell Hist hashtag, which is the new brand where we're doing these things specifically about the academy, we have the Norse for the next 4 weeks. At the end of October, we start as well with the what's it called, with the Masters of Renaissance, and there is a couple more tours. And please remember that at the beginning of November, I'm taking you on a live virtual tour of Malta, and the details are in there. And yes, Christine, they are actually noted in the actual indications for the I'll say it, for next session. I can't remember the actual exact page in there, but it is noted in the actual chapter in the website and in the email that you will be receiving. So that should be all perfectly indicated onwards. Yes, it's from chapter 10, from chapter 20 onwards, exactly. And there we go. Oh, the bad news were that some people hadn't received the links, and I was very sorry for that. So that was the bad news. Don't worry, it wasn't nothing dramatic. I was just being, a bit over the top. But that was all. I'm very, very sorry some of you didn't get to see the links behind. I hope that at least the examples that I grabbed were, good to see specific aspects of it. And like I said, if you have any questions, if you want to talk more about Havamal, whatever, the entire point of these sessions is that you can contact me. We can have, a continuation, and just, I'm here to serve you, essentially. So this is the end of today. I'm afraid I have to go and have some dinner. So I will be posting, in fact, let me post the links in here one more time for the upcoming tours, and also let me post the direct links for the rest of the info, so you can have it there. So here you also have my direct email. You have the direct link to the free academy courses for everybody and specifically for the Viking Age. And that's all for now. Yes, but recordings will only be available for a short period of time, guys. I think it's just a couple of days, so please be careful and be mindful. In any case, that's all for today. Thank you so much. Take care, and I'll see you very soon. Bye bye.